So hello everybody, welcome to our webinar today. My name is Tracy. I'm the Canterbury Catchment Coordinator for the New Zealand Landcare Trust, and I'd like to welcome you to our online seminar on health and safety for community groups. Today, while there will be some general health and safety for context, we are going to be focusing on catchment and landcare groups specifically with some key examples of different structures and the type of events that we might run. So the objective of this webinar is to create some discussion around health and safety, obligations of catchment groups, and get some thinking happening about the role that catchment groups and coordinators might play in assisting their catchment members with health and safety. So such as for catchment group field days and some awareness of what stages of growth in the catchment group journey might create a change in obligations. So the reality is we probably won't answer all of the questions today. We are on a 45-minute webinar and people spend years studying to be all over this stuff. With this in mind, we have actually already scheduled a follow-up workshop to be held later in the year, which will be in person in Selwyn. We'll be doing some really practical health and safety for event planning. We're very fortunate to be joined today by Renee Joblin. Renee is the Principal Practitioner for Et Alia Ltd based out of Rolleston in Selwyn, Canterbury. Renee has worked in health and safety in both Australia and New Zealand and has experience working in blue-collar industries. She's the co-owner and director of an engineering firm, and she does deal with health and safety for agriculture and our supporting industries. So while Renee is presenting, we're going to leave the question option open. So please feel free to ask questions as they come to you and we'll answer those at the end of the presentation. And because this is quite a technical and specific skill set, you will receive a feedback form at the end of the session, and it would be great if you could just give us some information back on what you enjoyed about it, but what you'd like to learn more of. And so that way that will help to shape future sessions that we will have. So as a disclaimer before we start, I mentioned that we are going to be talking about catchment groups, and there are some examples that we're going to be talking about, and they do sound specific. So I wrote those and or gave the context of what the catchment groups might look like. And this was in an effort to make it simpler to assess where the opportunities for health and safety awareness might be. There are any number of catchment and landcare groups up and down the country that these examples might relate to. So please do be aware that these are not based on anyone and certainly are not used to make an example of a catchment group that you may know. They are general catchment group structures that we might see while we're out and about in our work. So with all that being said, I'll now hand you over to Renee. Renee, thank you for being here with us. We certainly appreciate you making the time to join us and share your knowledge.
Thank you very much for having me. So hi everyone. Thank you again for having me. When we're looking at those catchment groups as well, if you do have something specific, type it in the chat and I'll do my very best to answer it on the fly. So we're going to take a look at all of these catchment groups and how the Health and Safety at Work Act will apply to you. A little bit about me. I started health and safety way back in 2013 in Australia. So I've worked under Australian legislation for quite a while before coming over to New Zealand just as our new Health and Safety at Work Act came into play. So currently I consult to small businesses and I teach them how to manage their own health and safety so that they don't need to get in expensive consultants, because I'm not a great fan of health and safety consultants, even though I am one. Go figure. Doesn't help when you go backwards in the slide. Right. So I always start everything with what's your why. It's usually the core of all of the things that I do. It's important to bring it back to why are we here today? Why do you do the things that you do, like go to work and join things like catchment groups? For me, it's these guys. I want to contribute to building a better world for them. I want them to be able to go out in the workforce and not risk their lives because their safety as workers was overlooked. I want them to be able to have a community where they can grow and flourish within themselves. I'm sure you guys want that for your kids too. In 1785, in a letter to John J. Thomas, Thomas Jefferson, I don't know who John Jay is, but anyway, in this letter, Thomas Jefferson, he said, they are cultivators of the earth are the most valuable citizens. They are the most vigorous, most independent, the most virtuous, and they are tied to their country and wedded to its liberty and interests by the most lasting bonds. And I'm really not sure that that philosophy has changed. Our country people, our farmers, they need protecting. We need to work together, and we need to learn to look after this land ourselves together as a community. But we also need to start looking after our people too, because in agriculture alone, from May 2022 to April 2023, there were 15 fatalities. I know that 15 doesn't sound like much, but putting that into context, there's less than 15 people watching us on this webinar right now. So with those numbers, that means that none of you would go home to your wives, husbands, kids, mums. Basically, you wouldn't live out your why just for the privilege of going to work in the morning. And that's pretty sobering. And to top it off, forestry and logging is the most notoriously dangerous industry in New Zealand. It's got such a bad reputation for workplace fatalities, and they only changed 3 families' lives. So to protect our precious workforce, and off the back of Pike River, the New Zealand government reviewed legislation, and they found it to be lacking. So they came up with the Health and Safety at Work Act 2015. And now there's kind of newish rules for us to comply with. And some of us are a little bit confused. But ultimately, the health and safety isn't just about compliance. It's about our whys. So let's look at 5 core pillars of the Act first. First of all, number 1, businesses have the primary responsibility for health and safety of their workers and any other workers they influence or direct. They're also responsible for the health and safety of people at risk from the work of their business. They've got senior leader officer duties, and these are company directors, partners, board members, chief execs. They must do due diligence to make sure that the business understands and is meeting its health and safety responsibilities. Then you've got overlapping duties. When the work of 2 or more businesses overlap, they must communicate, consult, cooperate, and coordinate activities to meet their health and safety responsibilities to other workers and other people, all different stakeholders that could be involved. So in this Act, what they've done is they've also made it not all on the business. Workers have responsibilities as well, and that they must take reasonable care for their own health and safety, and that their actions don't adversely affect the health and safety of others. They must follow reasonable health and safety instruction given to them by the business and cooperate with any reasonable business policy or procedure relating to the health and safety in that workplace. And last of all, we've got worker engagement and participation. All businesses and undertakings must have worker engagement and participation practices, regardless of their size, level of risk, or type of work that they carry out. So that's pretty broad. It means that, when you've got a really small business with just 1 company director and 1 staff member, they need to still engage their workers and find out what risks and ways that they can work together to manage the safety of each other. And we go back to my saying, health and safety, it's not just about compliance. It's actually about building better futures, because we want to do the right thing. We want to build it for our kids, and we want to build a better place. So, occasionally we also want to comply to get funding too, right? So what is the right thing? So if we're going to have a look at real world health and safety, we want to start with building a safety plan. So we're going to do a live workshop, like Tracy said, later on in the year. We'll look at specific for this. But we do need a few key points. So first of all, it's things like building a safety plan and documenting it. Just as you call to see if a place is available, you can ask for any known hazards or risks. It's about having a conversation. Like, it doesn't have to be any scarier than, hey, is your venue available? Oh, cool, great. So now when we come, is there any risks that we should know about? I'm bringing 20 people with me to look at the waterway. Do you want us to be aware of anything in particular? So it's just a conversation that you're going to have with the person. But then all you're going to do is just write that down. So once they say, yes, actually, we've got an effluent pond with no fencing around it, you can then just quickly note that down and say, all right, well, that's okay, because we're not going to be anywhere near it, and therefore your risk is mitigated. Some other things that need to be covered, keep it simple, like actually keep it simple. Health and safety, it's not about jargon. You don't have to make it sound all legislative. It's simply, Bob will ensure the cows are in a different paddock before we go in. We will be sure to shut all the gates behind us. You need to know where you're going as well. Know the layout of the place that you're at. Are there any dead spots for cell phone coverage? What are you going to do in the event of an emergency? Are there any rivers to cross? That sort of thing. And then in the event of an emergency or an incident, who does what? You need to have a coordinated response, because a coordinated response is an effective response. So we're going to look at things like Ralph will have a sat phone and we'll call emergency services. Mary has her first aid certificate, so she will have the kit and administer first aid if necessary. John will drive to the gate and meet the ambulance, and Pete will notify WorkSafe after the immediate danger is dealt with. So you can see there that it's actually a really, really simple plan, but it's specific and everybody knows what they're going to do. And that's the nuts and bolts of a safety plan. You have to know what your risks are and how it's going to play out if it does all turn to rubbish. So you also need to manage your contractors. So sometimes we would have a contractor come in and perform some work, but there are some different rules. If a volunteer organisation only engages a contractor as an individual to work for the association under a contract for service, then you would stay a volunteer association, not a PCBO. So it's still good practice to remember our whys, and that safety is not about compliance, because you need to understand the risks that they bring. And again, same, it's just a conversation. So, hey, Jenny, could you, so please you can help with clearing our waterway or planting our trees or testing our water, whatever it might be. Just wondering if there's anything you need to know from us in a safety sense, or if you're bringing any risks yourself that we need to be aware of. And then you're going to write it down. So for instance, a contractor bringing a digger, it's a really big risk, but how are you going to keep all of the other farm workers safe while it's there? So those are the sorts of things that you're looking at when you're building a safety plan. Please chuck any questions in the chat room. I can see them. So if you do want to ask a question, like, I'm wondering if I've overlooked explaining what a PCBO is. I'm hoping that everybody knows that. It's a person conducting business or undertaking, by the way. So is a catchment group a PCBO? Because that's a really defining question under the Health and Safety at Work Act, right? The answer is, yeah, because it's a broad concept used throughout the Act to describe all types of modern working arrangements which we commonly refer to as businesses. But it's also not a PCBO as well, because some organisations are volunteers only. So these are the people here that are not PCBOs, but the rules kind of change as you go along and as you apply it. So sometimes a catchment group could be an incorporated society or answerable to an incorporated society. So therefore it becomes a PCBO. So the line's pretty grey, but essentially what you need to remember is the minute that you employ a contractor or an employee, that's where your rules change. And we need to consider the third part of the Act, that third pillar, where the work of two or more businesses overlapped. They must communicate, consult, cooperate, and coordinate activities. So, for instance, when you go onto a farmer's land, you're at liberty to consult, communicate, and cooperate with that farm to organise what risks and hazards may be existing. So we're looking at waterways, effluent ponds, rut holes, animals, vehicles, and the risks that you are bringing as a catchment group onto their land, such as vehicles, people, tools, I don't know what sorts of things it could be. So this is actually directly off the WorkSafe website, and you're able to access it there with the link at the bottom. Essentially, we look there. Are you working for a community purpose? Yes, most of you all are. Is everyone in the group voluntary? Some yes, some no. So you can see there that that's where the line sort of starts to change. I'll just give you a wee minute to have a look at that. So the difference between a business and an undertaking also is that businesses are usually conducted with a view to making a profit and a degree of organisation and system and continuity, whereas an undertaking will have an element of an organisation, systems, and possible continuity, but they're usually not profit-making or commercial. So that's where a lot of catchment groups could possibly fall under the classification of an undertaking. So we're just going to run through a couple of examples here. DEF catchment group. It's made up of approximately 20 landowners from within their catchment, and it's been running since 2019. They aren't an incorporated society, but they do have a name and a formalised vision that they workshop together. They have an unpaid coordinator who is a local landowner, and they engage in a water monitoring program. There are 4 landowners who take water samples from their part of the river, and a farm consultant is paid by the catchment group to analyse the data. The group has 3 to 4 field days a year, as well as town hall meetings. The attendances are recorded for each of the meetings, and they have a bi-monthly newsletter that goes to all members, which is put together by an unpaid coordinator. So the catchment group there is not a PCBO. They're all volunteers. Even though they do have a coordinator, that coordinator is also volunteering. Remembering that the Volunteer Association is a group of volunteers working together for a community purpose who do not employ a person under a contract of service. Then they decide to have a field day, and they invite the whole catchment group to observe how water is sampled at John and Sherry's farm. A schmack kit is provided by Landcare Trust, and the NZLT coordinator demonstrates how to use the kit. Some of the catchment group members have turns with the clarity tube and other tools within the schmack kit, and John and Sherry put on a barbecue with a sausage sizzle for lunch. So who has what responsibilities for the field day, and why should they be concerned about their responsibilities? Essentially, because we're looking at a volunteer group with a limited amount of responsibilities under the Health and Safety at Work Act, it's actually John and Sherry who will bear the brunt of the responsibilities for this one, because it's their farm. The work is happening on their farm, and that farm is a PCBU, which will have responsibilities to meet under the Act. The catchment group then must consult, cooperate, coordinate, and communicate their plans and responsibilities to that farm so that the business knows what new risks are being presented and how they will be managed. So we've got overlapping duties there with a PCBU and a volunteer group. We've got a Silverstream Catchment Group. Silverstream Catchment Group is a group of 12 sheep and beef cow farmers, the majority of whom have known each other since their high school years. They've met every 4 months since 2020, and they have an unpaid coordinator named Charlie. The Silverstream Catchment Group want to stay as an informal group, but they do have some biodiversity goals and need funding for planting beside a shared river. Charlie makes an application, and they're excited to be awarded a grant for a 25K from a local biodiversity trust. As the Silverstream Catchment Group don't have a bank account, they ask the neighbouring catchment group, ANZ Catchment Group, to supply the admin side of things. ANZ Catchment Group agree and charge $200 to cover their paid coordinator's time in transferring money and assisting with the financial reporting back to the Biodiversity Trust. So is Silverstream Catchment Group a PCBU? Nope, they're not. They are volunteers. They are a group of volunteers. But ANZ Catchment Group is a PCBU. They employ a person. So if the local Biodiversity Trust requests the field day where their committees are able to see their money in action, what health and safety considerations and responsibilities lie with each party. It's a really interesting one, that one, and that sort of thing is going to be covered more in the workshop in person to person, because it goes quite in depth and every situation is going to be different. But essentially, it goes back to all parties consulting, cooperating, coordinating, and communicating plans, because the Biodiversity Trust is a PCBU, the ANZ Group is a PCBU, whoever's property it's on is a PCBU, and so they all have overlapping duties along with the Silverstream Catchment Group. Even though they are volunteers and they are initiating it, there's still PCBUs involved. So we're just going to have a quick look here at the overlapping duties. So it's more likely that businesses will be successful in meeting their duties to consult, cooperate, and coordinate if you plan ahead. By thinking through each stage of your event and what you're going to do, and then you can organise and recognise how the work could affect other businesses and the public. You need to identify the health and safety risks that need managing. You can consult other businesses to agree how to control each of those risks, and consult other businesses to decide which business or businesses are best placed to control each risk. You're going to clearly define the roles, responsibilities, and actions, and explain these so everyone knows what to expect. So that's how I was saying again about Mary's going to carry the first aid kit, and Bob's going to go and have the sat phone. Like actually be specific about who's going to do what. You've got to remember though that when you're coordinating with other businesses, this does not negate your own health and safety responsibilities. You will still have your own individual health and safety duties to comply with. Hopefully that makes sense. We're going to look at the Smithville Catchment Group now. They've existed since 2021. They hold regular bi-monthly meetings where minutes and attendances are taken, and they have a voluntary secretary and a part-time paid coordinator. They have 10 regular members and another 10 that come and go. As a group, they've decided to invite the local school to visit Bob and Lucy's cropping farm, where the children will visit an established biodiversity area and learn about different species and their significance. Apart from sounding fantastic, and I'd like to send my children on this excursion, the catchment group is a PCBO. So they employ a person. Even part-time people are still counted. Regardless of the legal obligations, what can be done to keep the kids safe? So, for instance, the group is actually entitled to ask for any information that's pertinent. For instance, can the kids swim? What age year level are we dealing with? Because the group of 5-year-olds at the preschool are definitely going to be managed differently to the 16-year-olds at the high school. So other things like, does anyone have any special needs, any allergies? Is someone allergic to bees? If they are, who's got the EpiPen? Is it the child carry the EpiPen, the teacher, or does the catchment group have to have one in the first aid kit? So there's all kinds of questions depending on the situation that you're going to be taking the children into. Again, you're going to look at other risks that the farm is going to carry. So is there an exposed effluent pond? Is there tractors, vehicles going past? What's going on around in that sort of situation? And who's going to have the responsibility to manage those things? Is it that we need extra teachers to come along or parent support to ensure that we have a higher ratio of parents to children? Some of the ways that multiple parties could use to communicate with each other. Traditionally, we find that group emails might not work. I do know people that if they're CC'd, they don't bother reading it because they get so many emails. So it's not always a good idea just to send out an email and CC people in. The best practice would be a pre-event meeting. That way then you can all coordinate together in the moment, the plan in writing. Remember thinking of your audience when you're writing the plan, no jargon, all plain language. For instance, child Z will supply the EpiPen, school A will supply parent help, and the catchment group will provide a guiding temporary fence so that everybody knows where to walk and don't go off the paddock. It all depends on your risk level. Again, that risk level is something that is dependent on each situation, and it's going to vary massively between every event and every farm and like everything. So that's something that we'll cover in the workshop where we can get like into a lot more nitty-gritty. We'll go back to ANZ Catchment Group here. So ANZ Catchment Group has been around since 2014 and is an incorporated society. They have an AGM every year and a committee comprised of a chair, vice chair, and a secretary, probably a treasurer, all those things, you know. They have received funding from their local water zone committee, MPI, and a local real estate firm. They employ Aaron as a coordinator full-time, and meeting facilitation is provided on a contracted as needed basis by George. As a larger group with a bank account and reporting abilities, they agreed to support Silverstream Catchment with their 25K grant from the Biodiversity Trust. So you can kind of see how they're a bit linked there. ANZ is definitely a PCBO. That's not even negotiable on that one. The Health and Safety at Work Act places a personal due diligence on officers of a business to ensure the organisation complies with its health and safety duties. So That's the responsibilities then for the board, for the chair and the treasurer and stuff, even if they are volunteers. So the Health and Safety at Work Act, or sorry, WorkSafe, say that while officers who are volunteers have a due diligence to ensure the PCBO complies with its duties and obligations, they do not commit an offence if they fail to meet it. This immunity ensures that voluntary participation at leadership level is not discouraged. However, volunteer officers may be prosecuted as other persons in the workplace if they fail to take reasonable care of their own or another person's health and safety while at a workplace, or fail to comply with the reasonable instructions about the health and safety given by the PCBO. So that means if you're on a farm and you might be the board of ANZ catchment group, and that farm has said, actually, we really need to comply with this, or you need to not go there, and you ignore it and you put your catchment group in danger, then you may be prosecuted under the Health and Safety at Work Act for failing to comply with a reasonable instruction. When you look at the responsibilities, what do they have for Aaron? So this again is not just the Health and Safety at Work Act. They're going to look at then the Employment Relations Act, Holidays Act, Fair Pay Agreements, and the Health and Safety at Work Act, all of the same legislation that a business has to an employee, because essentially that's actually what he is. He's an employee of the business that is the ANZ Catchment Group. And responsibilities for George, they come under managing contractors, part of the Act. So that was back in like Pillar 3, I think, where they consult, cooperate, and coordinate. So this is a whole section around overlapping duties and how you manage your contractors. And again, it's a really big topic, and it's not something that we can really define here in a webinar, but in the workshop, we'll definitely cover more about how to manage contractors and things like pre-qualing your contractors and looking at their health and safety at work, work plans, and how they would fall under yours and how you can consult together. I'm going really fast, actually. So if there's any questions, make sure you put them in because we're almost at the end already. So Miller's Catchment Group has existed since 2021. They have a strong membership across multiple land use types and people within the local village. 6 people have formed the steering group, and they have a vision and mission statement. They meet 3 times a year and would like to apply for funding. They've heard that it is a part of the funding process that they need to meet their health and safety obligations, but they don't know what these are. So, are they a PCBO? Well, it also depends on whether or not they're going to employ anyone. Going back to that slide with the drop downs, like, are they working together as a community? Do they employ anyone? And that will define whether or not they are a PCBO. Can the funders request certain health and safety procedures are followed or paperwork submitted, even if the catchment group is not a PCBO? Absolutely, they can, yes. So they can request it because the funder can be looked at as an officer or a stakeholder, both of which will want to know how you are meeting your obligations and if you've considered them. So I don't know, for instance, let's imagine if a major bank supported event like a rugby match and the grandstand fell down and everybody got injured, then people were going to look at, oh, look, that Westpac event went tits up. So they're going to need to know that you are going to understand what your risks are and how you're going to control them. Because also they need to know that they can have their due diligence and consultant stuff done as well. Where can Miller's Catchment Group look for assistance if none of their members are health and safety gurus? What? Are you telling me not everybody's a health and safety guru? Oh, no, I'm joking. Okay. Well, I know nobody wants to do this stuff. They can look at the WorkSafe website. Honestly, the WorkSafe website, it gets a bad rap, but it's actually fantastic. There's some really good, really simple, plain language information in there. You can look under the volunteer organisations. We can post up a link afterwards. I'm sure Tracy has a newsletter or something like that that she can send out some links to. The other place is that there might be a local health and safety advisor that you can access, or health and safety advisors on the HASAN's website. And then you can also give me a call. I've got a question here. Is it enough to have a plan in place to show that you've identified the risks, or do we need to go through the plan and get people to sign something at the end of every week? That's a really great question. So, yes, kind of. So you have your plan in place and it's going to have your identified risks, but it's also going to have how you've controlled your risks. And then part of that plan is informing people of your risks. And that's why businesses and things get you to sign things, because here, sign here to say that we have showed you how to manage these risks. Nobody actually reads those risks, right? So you do not have to have them sign it, but you do have to know what you're doing to make sure that the event is going to run smoothly. I hope that makes sense. Do I have an example of a volunteer group that might have had an incident? Or maybe I can try and think of something. I have had actually a volunteer group where they have a board and they have had an incident. Somebody broke their leg at an event. It was a really large event with hundreds of people coming through. Think sort of like an AMP type thing. And it was dealt with on the day by St. John as part of their plan. So they already knew that there was a risk that, with that amount of people going through the show, it could be, that somebody gets hurt or has a medical event. So they planned for St. John's to be on site. And that way then it could be attended. Afterwards, they then did an investigation to ensure that that person that got hurt, it could have been prevented, and if they need to change anything for the next event, and learn from their things. So that's a lot of what's about too. I think sometimes when we make all of these plans before the events, we kind of have the event and then go, yay, that was dealt with. And then we kind of forget to do a bit of a debrief and see what could we have done better next time? What can we do to make it run smoother? So when you are meeting as a catchment group after you've held an event, make sure you run through that plan and go, did it go according to plan? Have we looked at all of the avenues? Can you open it up live at all, Tracy, for people to jump in and ask questions? Or not really?
I am unsure. Sorry. The best I can do is the chat option.
Okay.
Yes, if there is anybody else with any other questions, please feel free to pop them in now as we are going to wrap up shortly. So Renee, just before we do though, and while people are thinking if they've got any last minute things they'd like to ask, We've discussed keeping the workshop very practical later on in the year that we're going to hold in Selwyn, and we are looking at having some usable resources that people will be able to walk away with, and you'll show them how to use it. Do you want to go into any detail about that, or is it best to send out an email following on from this session with a bit of an outline of what's going to be covered?
Oh, we could do both. So during a workshop, usually I look at how to risk manage. I will create a risk matrix for you guys that you can use for everything. Risk matrices are really simple tools. They can be used effectively into how much controls you need to put around something. So you'll be able to walk away with knowledge about that. We're also going to look at then how to create your safety plan, what components need to be in a safety plan. For instance, contractors, visitors, people, engagement, all of those sorts of things, because remembering back in slide, one of these slides here, if I go back to it here, not that one, sorry. There we go, worker engagement and participation. So, you know, as a PCBO and a catchment group, you guys actually still have to look at how are you making things safe for your coordinators and administrators. What do they need to do? And then when you hold an event, how do we engage with people and find out all the risks? So for instance, the risk of the school, having a school on, I'm sure that happens reasonably commonly. You know, what information are you getting from the school? What information do you need? And that is actually going to depend on what the situation around the farm has. What risks does the farm already have, and how do they control them? And then have the school tell you their other risks. So when we do the workshop, we're going to look more in depth at that sort of thing, like what questions can you ask? How do you communicate and consult better with other groups, and how do we make that plan together? Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And as I mentioned at the start of our webinar, there is going to be a feedback form coming out. So Renee and I have sort of discussed what we think the workshop might have in it and what might be useful. But what we'd really, you know, for it to be really valuable for catchment groups and for community groups, it would be great to have that feedback so that we can build what you guys are actually looking for. So thank you, Renee, very much for your time. One of the things that I love about your presentations is that you always start with what is your why, and you share very generously those pictures of your kids and talk about what your why is. And I think that's really important from the health and safety aspect, because when you go back to that, whether you're a PCBO or not, if you're a community group, you have that want to serve your community and to get other people together and create a really great environment for people to be in. And a part of that is keeping people safe. And, you know, that's just at the height of our thinking when we take people onto a farm and when we're engaging with schools especially. So I think that's really important, that people can get a lot out of a health and safety discussion, whether or not they're actually legally obligated.
Absolutely.
So thank you again for your time, and we really appreciate you being here to share your knowledge and being so generous with us and giving us something to think about. When we send out the feedback, we'll also, is it okay to put your details on there? I should have probably checked.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, hold on, I can also help out with that before we go. I did have it on a slide, but I've just jumped around now.
There we go, perfect.
Yeah.
So you don't mind if I pick up the phone, and if they let you know that they've been on this webinar, then you'll know that they're involved with a voluntary group, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. If anybody wants to just give me a call, I'm more than happy just to answer your questions. I will let you know if it's, you know, a bit in depth and you know, we need to get in a consultant to work with you one-on-one. But yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions. Thanks for your suggestion about the example of the field trip and working bee event. I will definitely make a mock-up of that for the workshop and make sure that we've got a good example there. Yeah.
All right, excellent. Thank you again, Renee, and have a good afternoon, everybody, and a safe weekend.